Okay. Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so I know I get sent me was in my phone is charging. I wonder if I have it. It's in regards to your introduction. Okay, so I think I'm just gonna kind of, I thought I had printed off, but I guess I didn't. Okay, so everyone, this is Michelle Jewsbury. Gosh, I've known you for, I don't know, maybe a couple years now. I interviewed you in January of last year, but that was before I was doing like any videos. Michelle is an author. She's a speaker. She's a humanitarian. She is actually a survivor of domestic violence. And she has taken her story and has actually helped people, not just within the United States, but also within Ghana, Sierra Leone, and now Rwanda. And she founded Unsilenced Voices. And in the process of doing that, she wrote a book that I love him. And it's really good. I actually read it. It was hard. But you said it was going to be hard because it was going to be triggering. But you did a really good job of really, I mean, it's well written, and you go through exactly kind of the things that you went through, the abuse, the rape, a lot of really hard things. But I think it's good because it gives an inside look to kind of what really happens rather than people making assumptions or thinking up something of, oh, did it happen like this or did it happen like that? Like it goes through some really tough things and really like detail as to the type of abuse, which I think is important because oftentimes that's not discussed, or people don't want to hear the details. They kind of are like, oh yeah, that happened, and you just kind of minimize it, but you can't minimize it with this. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about Unsilenced Voices. You are also, very much involved in the entertainment industry, and you actually wrote a one-person play, and it was based on this book. So I want you to tell them your story because you'll do it far better than I will. How did we get here? How did Unsilenced Voices come to be? How did this come to be? And then I'm going to ask you some specific questions that actually have to do with the book.
Okay, great. Whitley, first I want to say thank you so much for having me on. It's good to see your face. I mean, the last time we saw each other, we went to the Culver Hotel and had tea.
and ran into Vince Vaughn.
Yeah, and ran into Vince Vaughn. That's very, very true. So Vince Vaughn, if you're looking, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, no, that was a lot of fun, and you always bring this light and energy to everybody around you. So I've watched a lot of your interviews, and you do a lot of speaking against domestic violence, and you do a great job. So I'm very honored to be on your platform, and thank you so much. So yeah, if you don't know me, then I'm going to kind of start from the beginning. I'll only probably take about 5 or 6 minutes, tell you a little bit of my story, and then we can go into you asking me a ton of questions. So I was born in the 80s to two amazing parents. I love my mom and my dad dearly. Both have passed away. Unfortunately, my mom died a year ago and my dad died about 5 years ago. So it's been interesting being an adult orphan, but that's a whole nother story. So I grew up, my daddy was military, so I moved around a lot in my life, and I always had this fairy tale of having a Prince Charming in my life, a knight in shining armor, a guy who can come and whisk me out of the normalcy of my life. So in 2011, late 2011, I am reintroduced to this guy. We'll call him Paul. Very handsome, blonde hair, blue eyes, of having a Prince Charming in my life, a knight in shining armor, a guy who can come and whisk me out of the normalcy of my life. There we go, perfect.
I was like, what is going on?
Yeah, Zoom, right? This is virtual summits, virtual everything. We all have to have technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I am reintroduced to Paul, and in 2011, he starts pursuing me. He wants to date me. He sends me flowers and text messages, and we go to Lakers games, and we go to Dodgers games, and we go shopping and dinners, and you name it, right? I have a great time with Paul. Well, we start dating roughly January 2012, and about 4 months into the relationship was the first sign of physical violence. My head ended up going through the wall. So we got into an argument, and he just pushed me so hard against the wall that my head bounced. And I remember, and I say this a lot, stepping forward and just looking behind me and seeing the indentation. And all I could think to myself was, I have to get this patched. Not that I'm in trouble, I should run away. None of that went through my head. It's, I need to patch this. So that's exactly what I did. I patched it and brushed it under the rug. But I stayed with Paul for roughly 4 years, where I endured, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
physical violence, emotional violence, sexual violence, and financial abuse. When I escaped that relationship, which was roughly 2015, the end, I started documenting what happened to me. I literally just sat in front of my computer and wrote. And when I wrote and read it back to myself, that's when I had an aha moment, like, wow, how is this me that I'm reading about? And then that came out in a play. So I wrote and performed a 65-minute solo show called But I Love Him. And that debuted in 2016 at the Whitefire Solo Fest. And then later again that year at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. And what was so crazy about that is it was not only therapeutic and healing, but it started to impact people. And people started coming up to me and telling me their stories and saying, thank you so much for speaking up and speaking against this injustice that's been going on since the beginning of time. And at that point, I knew I had to do something more. So in 2017, I founded Unsilenced Voices. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. We work in Ghana and Sierra Leone. We just expanded to Rwanda last month, which is great. So expanding during a pandemic. We are also fiscal sponsors for two organizations, one in Nepal, the other one in the Netherlands. And we have a handful of partners, including Beyond Freedom International, which you interviewed Janelle Gordon recently on your show. Where she is a survivor of human trafficking. So we are now becoming advocates against human trafficking, because that happens so much throughout our world. I mean, in our backyard too, in the United States. It's crazy. So we're going to be doing our first event in the United States as soon as the world opens back up, to provide resources to survivors and education to the community. And then from there, I just began speaking. So I have the last actual stage I spoke at, besides, so I took one trip to Vegas recently and spoke there, but I got stuck in Africa, on the African continent, and then in London, coming back from Egypt. So I spoke in Egypt in March about my story, about domestic violence, about being able to speak up. And I speak on stages all around the world, just sharing my story and encouraging people to not live in your circumstances, because of what happened to you, it doesn't mean that that defines who you are.
Right.
It just means you have to have a different reaction to your situation. And that's what we teach, so I teach and I coach, and I am very grateful. And then last year is actually when I published my memoir, which that's the book that you read, and that is 100% accurate except for some names and places, but it's my full story. And like Whitley said, it is pretty intense. So if you do purchase the book, which I will include a link in the comments below, just make sure that if you do get triggered, if you are a survivor, if you are involved in domestic violence right now, set it down and take a deep breath, because I do go into some gruesome details about the abuse, specifics as well. So make sure that if it does bring up some PTSD, you put it down. But the great thing is the end, I'm still here. And now, because of what happened to me, I get to impact hundreds of thousands of people. And that's what a lot of you out there want to do as well. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah. And I actually, I did have to put it down quite a bit. And there's just times when I actually had to go back and reread it, because it was like, oh, I just like really read that. and, just giving it time to kind of just for me to process, and then just kind of it bringing up, triggering feelings and emotions of just stuff that I've gone through. Okay, so 65-minute woman play. I mean, was that stressful? Was that overwhelming?
Oh, beyond stressful. I mean, it was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. Writing and performing and memorizing 65 minutes of dialogue. And then I had an amazing director, Jessica Lynn Johnson, and she helped craft it for me. But literally, I remember my first show at the Whitefire, and about halfway through my performance, I forgot my lines. So I had a narrator. I mean, I was the narrator, but I had a character who was the narrator in my play. And I remember just sitting down on the bench and like just having her, do some workouts and talking. And then thank God the words came back to me. But I actually forgot all of my words halfway through. But I finished, and it was very good and therapeutic. It's crazy though. People used to tell me, oh, that's so therapeutic. And during that time in my life, I was like, go kiss my butt. I didn't want to hear it. I'm like, no, it's not. I'm doing this because I need to, but looking back, oh, it totally was, very healing, which is great.
There is a lot of things that I kind of, as I was reading through your book, actually, like, I don't know if you can see, I kind of highlighted a lot of them. But there's some things that I kind of just wanted to talk a little bit more on. One of them was just you saying life is not a fairy tale, and how often do us as girls, as women, envision this fairy tale ends up being so not a fairy tale at all. It's just life usually isn't what we had dreamed or hoped it would be, and that for some of us is more of a nightmare than even close to a fairy tale. You talk a lot throughout it, and I think you did a really good job of just kind of like really setting the scene of just kind of like starting from the beginning of going through like what you envisioned, and you have such an amazing relationship with your parents. I would have loved to have met them because they just seemed amazing. And then just kind of like how, you thought every time you thought you had found it, with a different guy, and then it wouldn't happen, and just kind of that heartache and that disappointment. I mean, to girls out there who are looking for that fairy tale, what advice or, what guidance would you give them?
I appreciate all your insight, and I appreciate, you going through my book, and definitely knowing a lot about me, because I'm very transparent. You can know everything about me after you read my book. But I actually do still believe in fairy tales, and I still truly believe in finding my knight in shining armor. And I had boyfriends, and I, probably talked about 4 or 5 different guys before actually meeting Paul. And most of those men are still my friends to this day. My high school sweetheart, I'll even say him by his real name, Roy Coney. He ended up going to my father and my mother's funeral. And every time I'm up in Idaho, we reconnect and say hello. So we ended on shaky terms, but then we're still good friends. And I know that I could call on him on any moment, right? But when I was with Paul, he tore me down. My mama raised me to be a strong, independent woman, and I still got myself trapped in that abusive relationship. But upon leaving, he had left me with a lot of internal scars, a lot of emotional baggage. And it took a few years for me to get over that by going to therapy, by implementing even our 5-step process that we teach, implementing all of these tools to help me overcome. Well, I ended up dating a guy shortly after Paul who was absolutely amazing. And he was a fairy tale. And we learned how to golf together. And he knew how to golf. He taught me how to golf. But he just showed me what it was like to be loved again. And it was absolutely amazing to spend those 7 months. I'll call him by his name too, because we're still best friends. Dan, right? I dated Dan for about 7 months, and he made me feel like everything was okay. Like I was okay. I wasn't this broken, fragile piece of glass that if somebody dropped me, then I would break. And we didn't work for practical reasons. However, we still are good friends. We golf all the time together. And we communicate often, and I really appreciate him. So looking at my life now, yes, I'm single, and I am looking for a mate, a match. So boys, if you're out there. But the thing is, what I would tell everybody is, now, because I've experienced so much grief and trauma and domestic violence, I now know what I want. So I am not going to take less than what I want. And there's nothing wrong with that. So, I've written out, my pros and cons, and what I want in a man. It's also, what do I bring to the table? I'm caring and loving, and, a Christian woman. And I just want somebody to treat me the same way. And yes, it's difficult, but it's attainable. There's 7 billion people on this planet. There's somebody out there.
One of the things I read in the book was your mom saying, because she had gone through things, and those who read the book will read, the abuse that your mom, Wendy, had gone through. And at one point she had said, everything I went through, I tried to protect you from. Mm-hmm. And, I think about just like things I've gone through, and I mean, gosh, things you've gone through. And just like, I would hope that it would stop with me. And I'm sure that you would hope that the generational pattern of abuse would stop. I mean, when she had said that to you, I mean, what, I guess, was going through your mind? Because how old were you when she said that?
She said it multiple times to me, and she told me, even when I was a child, times that I couldn't remember. She explained a lot of these situations to me later on, of course, when she was alive, and she's not with us any longer. But my mom and my dad were great. Like, they were an amazing couple. When my mom died, I had so many people coming up to me telling me that my parents were a fairy tale, that their love will go on forever. My mom died of a broken heart because my daddy had left, and she didn't know how to live without him. So when my mom told me, I tried to protect you from everything that I had gone through, my mom was, molested and raped and hurt by her stepfather and hurt by her neighbors. And she had a really, really rough childhood. Well, like I said earlier, she taught me to be the strong, independent woman, but yet I still fell victim to being in an abusive relationship. And I don't think that there's a relationship between the two. I think that it's more cyclical, where I needed something or wanted something even more, and I grasped on to Paul giving me that type of affection and attention, right? Which doesn't make anybody wrong. So if you are out there and you are experiencing any type of abuse, it's not your fault. So that's the thing that I like to say. It's never your fault, but it will stop with me, because the one thing that I will do, if I have daughters, if I have children, I will talk to them, and I'll explain to them at a very young age what this looks like, why I ended up getting myself trapped, what real affection is supposed to be. And it's all learning. So it's a nature nurture controversy. It's who you hang out with, and the genes that you were born with. So it's just teaching our children what to look for and those red flags, and to notice a lot of the negative things, and also to respect yourself so much that you won't tolerate it.
Yeah, and you talk about in the book about, the difference between healthy and unhealthy boundaries, but also knowing your worth. And I mean, so often when we think we don't deserve, and you actually said that in the book, and I'm not probably not going to quote you exactly, but you had said that you thought you deserved this. Like, with what was happening with Paul, you thought it couldn't be green on the other side, that this was like the best you could do. But if we help women and girls to have healthier self-esteems and self-worths, then when something like this happens, they might be able to better see the red flags and be able to be like, okay, I deserve better than that. I'm not going to take that. And I know that I never had healthy boundaries because I wasn't really shown healthy boundaries. And my worth, I was told it had to do with you have to be a virgin, or it had to do with sexual. And so that's what, I thought that's all that my worth was. And so that's how I was treated. And unfortunately, you find yourself in a lot of abusive and bad, unhealthy, unsafe situations. But I thought that that was really good that you mentioned that in the book of just how important that is.
You know what's crazy is, so I believe in God. I believe in Christ. I pray daily, even though if I'm mad, right, whatever it is. However, I think that a lot of Christians tend to use Christianity as an excuse for many things, including domestic violence and abuse. And I think that just like Jesus says in the Bible, you cannot judge me by my people. And unfortunately, Christians, a lot of Christians are very judgmental. They put stigmas on you. Oh, if you're not a virgin until you're married. And then when you want to get a divorce because you're being beat up or hit, or it's just unhealthy for you or your children, then they oftentimes say that it's your fault. Right. So first off, I know that you have a huge Christian following, and I know your platform, you have a lot of amazing people. But I have the same belief system. That's what I want to tell everybody. I just don't believe that Christians should Bible thump and push their agendas on other people. And especially this whole belief system that you're going to hell if you're not a virgin, and that if you get a divorce, then you're going to just take a breath. Life is confusing, right? Even when Jesus walked this planet, life was very, very confusing. So it's just learning those boundaries and learning that we can't accept horrible treatment. And women from the beginning of time have accepted that this is our role in society. Well, not anymore. I mean, look at America now. We have Kamala Harris running for vice president of the United States of America. She's half African American and she's half Asian from, I don't remember, India. She's half Indian. And what a light and shining armor that this could be to help uplift the women's empowerment movement, to give us our voices back, because we are just as important as men. We also need men to talk about this. So if you are listening, we definitely need guys out there to have women's backs. And really, equality is something that can be attained and achieved. And once we get that, once we finally achieve that, then I don't think we're going to be seeing domestic violence at least as much as we see now. I mean, over 1/3 of the women in the world have experienced domestic violence. It's unbelievable, the statistics.
Mm-hmm. I think it was great when the whole Me Too movement happened, because it was like women all over, it didn't matter your platform, it didn't matter your status, it didn't matter your color, it didn't matter anything. We're coming together on this common thing of we're going to speak out. Like, this is not okay. And that was so empowering to see so many people standing together. And you're right, we do need men standing up for us. We do need them speaking out to other men. And I actually was just talking to another guy about this earlier before I got on with you, about how I was like, men need to talk. Men need to speak up and stand up for us, because it will come across like other men will listen more to men than sometimes they listen to us.
Yes. And I mean, I'm not stereotyping. Domestic violence does happen to men. It does happen to the LGBTQI community as well, not just to women. It's just primarily women. Now, I'm going to piggyback off of what you said with the Me Too movement. It was a great movement when it started. And in my personal opinion, I think that the pendulum has swung way too far the other side, and it needs to mellow out a little bit, because not all men are evil. And we can't blame all men for the detestable things that awful men do.
Right.
And we just need those good men to speak up is what we need. So I think that there is a common ground that we will all reach hopefully soon, after this pandemic, after we get rid of who's in the White House right now. But yeah, definitely.
You know, in regards to like the Bible thumping, you know, something that I've kind of, I think, always struggled with is that, like, a lot of the people that I've met, like, that are Christians, are not truly representing Jesus's hands and feet. There's a lot of judgment, and you know, I've often kind of been like, why is that? Like, you know, they're in positions of leadership within churches or in other, you know, positions of leadership, and it just has been so confusing. And I literally like just had to come to this realization that no one is a good representation of Jesus. I mean, because Jesus is Jesus. But I think a lot of times when people who are in a position within faith-based communities or groups, and they're put on that pedestal, you know, they really kind of, for those people who aren't Christians, and for those people who are Christians, they're setting a bad example as to what a Christian is, because they're really not living it. You know, there's a lot of judgments, and there's a lot of, you know, you need to do this, and you need to do that. And I think Billy Graham said it best. He said, when he was asked, his daughter had asked him, because he had been at some function, and there's people of every different religion, every different political background, I mean, everything. And she said, how do you get along so well with everyone? And he said, because it's my job to love. It's God's job to judge. And I just thought, wow, that's so true. We're not going to approve or be accepting of everything everybody's doing, but there's a difference between acceptance and there's a difference between approval. We can still be accepting of that person. We don't have to agree with their lifestyle, but treat them with respect and treat them with kindness and show them Christ-like love.
Yes. And you know, if you're listening and you know, maybe Christian talk is not what you want to be hearing, I'm gonna talk about a book quickly that relates to both. I have a friend, his name is George Chanos. He was the former Secretary Nevada, the Secretary of State of the Nevada. He was in politics in Nevada. How about that? And he wrote this book called Millennial Samurai. And Millennial Samurai consists of about 140 something chapters, but each chapter is super small, like 2 pages long. And it's all about the characteristics needed for the 21st century, needed for us to survive as humanity now. And the number one characteristic that he talks about mostly is empathy. Now, being empathetic to somebody means that, you know, you can see they're in a crappy position, you care for them, but you're not going to judge them. You know, there's no judgment there. It's like if you're a Christian woman and you view somebody who is not Christian and you have judgment against them, but you have no idea their history, their story. That is something that is not going to fly in the 21st century. And Billy Graham did say it best, you know, we have to live by love. You know, every religion, the commonality, the common theme is love. You know, and we have to come from that. You're not going to agree with everybody. You're going to disagree on so many levels, but you need to be able to come together and be open-minded and have a conversation, not judge people for what happened to them or because, you know, they were trafficked and then or they, you know, experienced trauma or and then now they're doing something that you might not approve of. Judgmentalism is something that is definitely not something that we're supposed to do. And it says in the Bible, do not judge, right? Do not judge. And the portion where it does say you can judge, it says you can only judge people who go to your church. So, sorry.
No, and you know what, I think
about people doing that.
You know, in regards to Billy Graham, what I liked was not only did he say that, but it showed in his life, because people from, I mean, all different political backgrounds, different, you know, whatever, were going to him and seeking counsel. Like, they trusted him. And it's kind of like he was like this peacemaker. I mean, like, he could be going over here and talking to this person, they got along great. You could go over here and talk to this person. It was just like wherever he went, it just, there was peace. There wasn't war. There wasn't riots. There wasn't judgments. There wasn't, you pointing fingers. Like he just really was like, just show them love. And by doing that, he really showed us that this works. When you show love, this works.
Yeah, and that takes us to the 21st century. That takes us to 2020 right now, because if you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, this is just piggybacking off of what Martin Luther King Jr. started back in the 60s and 70s. And if you actually think about the timeline, the women's empowerment movement and the African American movement all have the civil rights movement all happened at the same time, and now we 50 years later are looking at our lives going, okay, great. So that was the beginning of change. And now we really have to implement more change now, giving women more rights. And this goes, this leads us back into domestic violence and abuse, but also giving African Americans more rights and not looking at somebody based on the color of their skin.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so tell me about your come to Jesus moment in 2010, because you actually talk about it in your book. And so why don't we just touch a little bit on that?
When I was baptized?
No. Let's see. It was like you talked about, like, I think it was before the baptism, because I have the Easter weekend.
Oh, okay.
But then like you in 2010 there was
So I don't publicly talk about this a lot, but it's in my book. So I don't mind talking about it, because if you read my book, you find out everything about me. I was a cocaine addict for about 2.5 years. And this was roughly around 2010, 2009-ish. And I thought that I was just fine. I would come home from work and do a lot of coke with a lot of friends, and I had a lazy Susan where we would just pass around the dish around the table. I was in pretty deep, and I remember at some point, and it was roughly 2010, because the dates are accurate in my book. I don't remember the dates.
It was 2010.
Okay, awesome. So I remember there was one time where we had all gone to bed, and of course I couldn't sleep, so my heart was going 1,000 miles a minute, and I was literally just looking up at the ceiling fan. And I remember saying, if anything is out there, if anybody is out there, I promise I'll quit. I just need help. And the ceiling fan answered me. And what I mean by that, a lot of people are like, what do you mean? God talked to you? I'm like, yeah, subconsciously, yeah, he did. And all I felt was love, and all I heard was, it's going to be okay. And then from there, I got baptized and I started getting off of cocaine. And I didn't have to go to rehab or do any of that. I was bored, right? My whole life, I've been kind of bored. I was a varsity cheerleader. I was National Honor Society in school, but I used to do drugs on the weekend, and I did that because I was bored. I wanted something more. And how many of you guys out there want something more? That's why you're listening to this right now. So that more came to me. Now God has gifted me with helping hundreds of thousands of people, but I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my story. And that's something that is so important and powerful to say, because your story can mean so much to so many people. And yeah, I kicked coke, thank God. I'm not perfect. There was times in between where I used to party a little too hard, but I found God, and God helped me through.
What's interesting is you and I were both baptized during like Easter weekend. You in 2010 and I was in 2009. I was like, oh, we both baptized within each other, which is really neat. Okay, so why do you think women like so easily believe men? When like women will tell us stories about like, here, like this is something to look out for, this is a warning, and yet we just it's so easy to believe them, because you want to believe like the best, but like why do you think we as women kind of fall into that a lot?
Well, I'll talk about it looking at a relationship that you're already in that's destructive, because it's different coming into a relationship with a brand new person. But then why do people stay? Why do women stay? And the primary reason is because of the apology stage in the cycle of domestic violence. There is an entire cycle. It goes from walking on eggshells to a big blow up to the apology stage. And it goes around and around and around over and over again. And I remember in particularly when I was beat up really, really bad. It was the October event, the one that I actually have pictures in my book.
Mhm.
And the next morning I woke up and my face was black and blue. I had this awful black eye. And Paul just looked at me and began to cry. And he said, I'm so sorry. I love you so much. I promise I won't ever do it again. And I wanted so badly to believe him, because here's the thing, he believed it himself, you guys. So that's why we continue staying trapped in those abusive relationships. Are you showing the picture?
Well, I was going to ask, is it okay if I show them?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, it's in my book. Yeah, you can.
So this is the pictures.
Yeah. So yeah, pretty bad. And I stayed, and the reason I did stay is because I did believe him. I chose to believe the good instead of what I had seen. And unfortunately, it didn't stop. We did all kinds of things, from landmark to therapy to you name it, and it didn't stop. But the most important thing that I learned from this entire situation is forgiveness, right? Because in the beginning, I didn't forgive him. I hated his guts. I was so angry for what he had taken from me, for me allowing myself to stay in something that is so destructive that could have killed me multiple times. But then I sat for a year, 2 years after escaping this relationship, and I used to sit in the back of church and just cry because I wanted to do something. And God kept telling me, no, don't press charges, or don't do this, or, relax. And that is where I learned to forgive him, because hurt people hurt people. And unfortunately, Paul was hurt, and he didn't address a lot of his childhood traumas and didn't want to talk about them. He has an estranged relationship with his mother. There was one time where he actually called me by his mother's name when he was beating me up. And it's so important to remember that he is hurting others because he has not healed yet. And I learned to forgive him. Now, forgiveness does not mean going back to him, does not mean that I want to be in a relationship with him at all. It just means that I've let this grudge go, and it's almost more freeing for me than it even is for him.
I want you to kind of touch a little bit more on why is it difficult to leave? Because that seems to be like one of the biggest questions. People will be like, but why didn't she just leave? Yeah. So can you touch on that? Because I mean, your book really describes really well, like how you kept finding yourself going back, and kind of like just, I loved how you included the cycle and like all the information that you included in there, because it's a great resource. But if you could just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for saying that. I looked up a lot of statistics, and a lot of statistics in the dang book. So the cycle of domestic violence is this crazy wheel, right? And a lot of us have experienced domestic violence and abuse, and a lot of your listeners have or are going through domestic violence, and they're probably wondering themselves why they can't escape. And I know that I left my abuser roughly 7 different times. And that's the typical average. And the reason why you don't just leave is because you really do love that person. I really did love Paul. He, to this day, is the best and the worst relationship I've ever had. And I say that multiple times throughout the book. We used to drive down the freeway together and hold hands and laugh and blast Florida Georgia line. And, we used to go to movie theaters and throw popcorn at each other and giggle. And, the intimacy, it was amazing. But then when Jackal turned to Hyde, or vice versa, he was a monster. And behind closed doors, he was a completely different human being. Well, the apology stage, like I said before, is the main reason why people stay in abusive relationships, because you want to believe the abuser and the abuser actually believes what they're saying. So it is this very weird line where I believe that abusers can be healed and won't hurt anymore, but it takes a lot of work. It's the same type of work that it takes for a victim or a survivor to go through in order to heal and move past what they've gone through, right? Um, so with Paul, I thought that I was that backboard for him where he could, tell me things, and he would bring me to business meetings and ask me my advice, and he made me feel important. And then on the other hand, he made me feel like a piece of dirt on the ground. So people don't leave because you love them and because you really truly believe the lies.
Yeah. You had mentioned the magical relationship of trust. Can you kind of explain that?
Magical relationship of trust. Yeah. I have that now, right, with my friends and my family now. But that magical relationship of trust didn't really exist back then. It was the walking on eggshells part of our relationship was very estranged. I would go grocery shopping, come back and get yelled at for spending $200 at the grocery store. Yet we could go and spend $700, $800 for dinner for his employees at a really nice restaurant in Hollywood. So the trust factor, I didn't trust he was going to treat me well all the time, but I also didn't think that he was going to hurt me all the time. So in particular, we ended up going on a trip to Mexico. And while we were in Mexico, he had assaulted me a couple of times, and my parents were actually there along with his business partner. And I had to keep a lot of that from him, but I didn't trust that he wasn't going to stop drinking in order to save my life. So I would literally sit there and count his drinks in a night and beg him not to have any more because I was fearful of my life. And I couldn't talk about it back then. My daddy actually never really heard me speak because he passed away before I told my story. And my mom saw my play and all she could do was cry. And I don't blame her because it's rough, but it's really hard to trust people. And especially after you've gone through something so severe, the trust factor is, really important. And if somebody crosses me, I give second and third chances. However, if it's extreme, then, you got to sever that relationship.
On page 46, you said he did a very good job at manipulating my thoughts by his words of affirmation and then tearing me apart with contradictory statements. And I mean, like, that's so true because that can cause it, like, just for us, it's hard to then believe, like, what's true, what's right. And it makes it difficult for us to then trust ourselves, and why oftentimes survivors, victims end up finding themselves either back in that same relationship or find themselves in similar relationships.
Yeah, very much so. And there was one time before I wrote and performed But I Love Him, I produced a play, and Paul had actually come to the theater and watched my play. And in the beginning, he's, oh, you're so great, you're amazing, you're beautiful, you're talented, all of this. But then during the play, he literally just sat on his phone and worked the whole time. And when I got done with the play, instead of the words of affirmation, he would be like, well, that was a waste of your time. Why did you do that? And then inside me, I'm just like, wait, I thought you said that I was talented and beautiful and successful, and now you're telling me it's a waste of my time and I shouldn't be doing this. I'm so confused. And that manipulation is, I mean, it's so confusing because he tells you one thing and he does something else, and then he tells you something else outside of everything else. It's it's very hard dealing with a narcissist, for sure.
Yes. Explain gaslighting.
Gaslighting.
Yeah.
So that is when you pretty much make somebody feel and think like they're wrong. So there was one time where I was assaulted outside of a nightclub, where Paul was spitting on me and kicking me and pulling my hair and things like that. And we made it through the night, but the next day he woke up and, I didn't leave at that point, but we had a conversation, and he kept saying, well, you remember it differently than what happened. And he said it so convincingly that I was starting to question what actually happened. And that's gaslighting, is making people believe something that's not true, or making people believe that the truth isn't true. And that was really difficult for me to overcome.
I think that also happens when things might happen when you're a lot younger, and as you start to remember them, people might, have said like, no, that didn't happen, and it can be very confusing. And I feel like it can kind of cause even more harm, because you're trying to kind of like work through something that's probably been repressed and coming, to light, and yet you're being told that no, that would never happen, that didn't happen, and just, it's an awful situation. Okay, so I want to talk about your organization, because you're doing some amazing work. And I mean, some of the stories that you've told me, I actually want you to share, because you've had some meetings in, was it Sierra Leone? Because it was in regards to spousal rape, and how, I mean, it's acceptable. And you're kind of speaking out against, was it the tribe leader or the chief?
Oh, you're talking about, so we had a community meeting in Sierra Leone. This was a couple of years ago now. And we had an Islamic leader come and speak, because we're very open and wanting of everybody of all races and religion to come and express themselves and talk their story. And I was present, which I was happy about during this time. So this Islamic leader stood up and talked a lot about how it's super important that women please their men. And if their men aren't pleased, then men can go out and replace their wives. And if they don't behave themselves, then it's okay to make them behave. So I let him talk for, I don't know, about 5 or 10 minutes before I was like, okay, this is enough. I'm gonna speak now. And it's interesting, different, backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds, whatever it is. It's not just Islam, because Islam isn't just like this. Because I spent time in Egypt and I met some amazing people there too. But you don't know what you don't know, right? And unfortunately, even like in Ghana, when I was in Ghana, there's a tribe, I think it's the Timene tribe, and some of the women came to me and told me, well, if my husband doesn't beat me, that means he doesn't love me. And it's the shifting of cultural ideas, and learning to love yourself. So we are actually making huge headway in Sierra Leone, because we are doing sensitization meetings with the community members, men and women. So the women actually asked me to involve men in the educational seminars in their country. And we did. And once that happened, then it was like firecrackers. The women would talk, the men would talk. And then oftentimes the men would be like, oh, I didn't know I couldn't do that. So like I said before, you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of these people, they don't know that women are just as equal and just as worthy as they are. But it was really interesting, that situation with that Islam leader, and he let me speak. I talked about Christianity, but I also just talked about love, like you and I talked about earlier, and how they like to use the Bible where it says women need to
Submit.
Thank you, that's the word I'm looking for. Submit to their husbands, but they oftentimes forget the verse afterwards where it says Jesus loved the church, and Jesus wouldn't hurt the church, so men shouldn't hurt their wives and should love them like Jesus loved the church. So we oftentimes like to mumble jumble words together, and it doesn't have the same meaning. So it was interesting.
Yeah. I had read a book by Gary Thomas, and it was the Sacred Search, and in it he basically speaks to that, and he says guys need to realize that they need to lay down their life like Christ laid down his life for the church. They need to be like a martyr. So it's not just the wife submitting, like she's submitting to a husband who's laying down his life. And he said, and a lot of people, they miss that part. Like how important this role is. Okay, so tell us what exactly like your organization does in Sierra Leone and all these other places, like the difference that you guys are actually making for women.
Yeah, no, super, super excited to talk about this. So we have a lot of partners. I believe that collaboration is key. So everybody on our team, we have that belief system that the more we collaborate with people, and especially in-country organizations led by their own people, it's best. So in Sierra Leone, we've partnered with a handful of organizations there, including the Women's Vocational Center in Bo, which is amazing. And we actually rescue young girls from the street who sell themselves as sex workers to go through this vocational training to learn a skill so they can do tie-dye Angara or baking or hairdressing, whatever it is, so they can get off the street. So we teach them a skill. In the meantime, we also educate them all about domestic violence and sexual abuse and sexual genital, female genital mutilation, FGM. That's something that we don't talk about a lot because in that country, women are actually the ones who bring their daughters to go get it done. So I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of the women who believe that that should still happen. So we're not stepping on toes. However, we are changing minds is what we're doing. And we just show statistics and education, and we're doing the same thing. So there's a village in Sierra Leone that we support partially during COVID. We, masks, training about domestic violence. We're giving rice. We're also helping a lot of the beggars and homeless on the streets. And then women, we do community sensitizations and market sensitizations. We've handed out lots and lots of like I said, masks and rice. We're also doing a program for women, especially in villages, to where it'll be more of a micro loan program. So we'll give them a small loan, a small stipend, so they can start their own business. But that's just one aspect. That's just Sierra Leone. In Ghana, we have a partner called the ARC Foundation, and they're Ghanaian led, and they have a shelter near Accra, Ghana, for survivors of domestic violence. And they had lost their funding, and then they tried to reopen. And at this point, we are helping with some of the cost of that shelter. And we are also we have also employed a couple of their employees to go out and do sensitizations in schools. So we're doing school sensitizations also in Sierra Leone, but in Ghana, we see 600-700 kids every sensitization where we talk about domestic violence and sexual abuse and rape and what it means to treat each other with respect and not abuse, things like that. And we talk a lot about child abuse because child abuse is very prevalent over there, especially when it comes to like teachers on kids or parents and relatives on their children. So it's crazy. And then in Rwanda, we've partnered with an organization called IDA Rwanda. And they are an existing organization to help survivors of domestic violence, but they needed some more funds to be able to do more outreach, even more outreach. So we're giving, kits to a lot of the women who need a lot of personal items, of course, rice and food, face masks because of COVID, but education about domestic violence. And then Nepal and the Netherlands. Nepal, we don't really do any programming there. We're just a fiscal sponsor. And in Nepal, the organization is called Happy Children. And if you donate through us, it goes directly to them if you make a note for it. But they have 2 orphanages in Nepal. And it's really sad because serfdom, which is the caste system, still exists. And a lot of the kids are born into to a servant or to a family that doesn't have any money, and they end up getting sold to lords and then become sex slaves or just child brides, and you name it. So then these kids run away to these orphanages, and Happy Children buys back these kids at like 600 euros per head. So it's crazy. And then we just started our fiscal sponsorship with an organization in the Netherlands. So we'll see how that goes, but it's the Alamo Foundation. Very excited about them. They just want to see change, sustainable change in the world regarding women's empowerment and many, many other issues. So that's why we're excited about that. And then here in the United States, you know, like I said, we're starting to partner with organizations dealing primarily with human trafficking, helping to educate the public. I mean, people don't understand that there's 13 main hubs of trafficking in the United States alone, and there's like 3 main ones just in Southern California. So it's kind of crazy to think that there's over 200,000 kids in the United States being trafficked as we speak. And I actually believe that statistic is low. I think that there's a lot more, especially because of the pandemic. So here in the US, what we want to do is, of course, bring education, but our end goal in the United States is to have some type of shelter facility, similar to the Downtown Women's Center on Skid Row. I worked there for about 6 months. Amazing, amazing organization. But I would like to have it more be a shelter, so an overnight stay, and also, you know, open to many of the women on the streets. That was a long explanation. Sorry.
No, that was great. That was a lot of great information. So to my viewers, I actually have put your birthday fundraiser on my timeline, and then I'll also include your website so that, you know, if anyone wants to give, I mean, it's going to a great cause, and it's basically helping so many people in so many different places of the world in regards to combating violence.
Yeah, we've impacted thousands and thousands of people. I mean, listen to this story, you guys. So we have a girl in Sierra Leone that we rescued from the streets, and, you know, had her go through vocational training, and she's still in school, but I got to meet her, and I literally got there, and she gave me a chicken and clothes, and that's expensive. It's money that they don't have, but it was showing appreciation. And now she is on the ground, going into, you know, with the sex workers, talking about how it's important to get off the streets, talking about how, you know, you matter. She is doing this because she went through the program, and now she's an advocate, which is absolutely amazing. I don't take any money from Unsilenced Voices. This is why I speak. This is why I do my coaching, right? Because this is how I make my money. Unsilenced Voices has actually taken over 40K of my money, which I'm so happy and grateful for, because my mission on this planet is to help other people. And in order to do so, you need funds. So if you can donate, we would greatly appreciate any donation from $10 all the way up. And we have an easy bit.ly link. So if you're familiar with bit.ly, it's bit.ly/donate Unsilenced Voices. You can also go to unsilencedvoices.org and hit the donate button there as well. But we need as much help as humanly possible.
I'll never forget, you had told me a story, and I don't want to mess up like the details of it, but about just how some of the children, like young children, are taking care of their families because of sickness, or there's a parent that's not there, and they sell themselves for a bag of rice. And how much did you say that bag of rice is that they're selling themselves for?
So before I started Unsilenced Voices, I interviewed for a nonprofit organization called Art and Abolition, and they work in Kenya to help kids get off the streets. And I remember interviewing for that organization, just loving their mission, and they told me a story of these kids who sell themselves for 50 cents. Yeah, it's yeah, it's bad. You know, white American males are the #1 consumer of human trafficking, right? And when we talk about child pornography, and when we talk about, you know, child sex workers, they don't want to be on the street, you know, and they're there because they can't afford to feed themselves or feed their parents. So they're there selling their bodies to Johns. And the only way to stop this horrible, horrible cycle is we have to stop the Johns. And that is the only way to stop it. So it's so important to spread this awareness, especially around the United States, because this is unacceptable behavior. I mean, we talk that America's great and we talk that other countries are great. However, we can't handle the abuse that happens. We can't handle the poverty that happens. I mean, there's over 60,000 homeless people in Los Angeles right now. Why is that? And over 1/3 of the women who are homeless on Skid Row are there because of domestic violence issues. I want your viewers to let that sit and sink in, because this is a problem. These are problems that we can fix. These aren't problems that we should let persist, because we are a global humanity. We are not just one country against another country. We all breathe the same damn air. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it when people think that it's all about one country or another, or all about one race, or all about one religion. We all share this planet together, and we cannot seem to take care of over 50% of the people who live here. So it's time to make a change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, I've been trying to post a lot of stuff about sex trafficking and how prevalent it is in just porn industry, and just how it's a supply and demand, and the porn industry is impacting sex trafficking and human trafficking. And I think a lot of times people don't really realize how much they coexist, like how much they are connected. And here, I mean, these little kids selling themselves for 50 cents, like, shouldn't happen ever.
No, it shouldn't happen. And if you do want to support that organization, it's called Art and Abolition, and they work out of Kenya. So it's an amazing organization as well.
I'll include that as well. Now, I wanted to talk about so the moms that you've talked about in regards to the female
genital mutilation.
Just to kind of like better understand their culture, what was the reason for saying why they still felt it was necessary?
Promiscuity is the number one concern for a lot of mothers in those countries that still believe in FGM, and also cleanliness. So without going into details, they just think that the female parts are not clean, and that if they chop off part of it, then it stays cleaner. However, that's not the case, and of course we know with FGM it causes many deficiencies. It causes illness, it causes infections, you name it. It's pretty bad. But the one thing, the primary reason that they do it is promiscuity. And unfortunately, when a woman has FGM happen, you don't enjoy sexual intercourse afterwards. Mm-hmm. And it's just unfortunate that so many still believe that women don't need to enjoy that, and that we are just put on this planet for reproduction.
Yeah, I mean, that's just at one point in time, I liked what you said in your book, and I forget what, I guess it's on page 108. I wrote down on page actually, and it was just how you had said it. You had said it was almost like a sick addiction that made me keep going back to Paul. I knew deep down in my soul that Paul was a sadistic, abusive man, but I got to the point where I thought I needed him. I continued allowing him to control my life. It was like craving your drug of choice before having serious withdrawals. First time you take a hit, you don't need much, but then you grow a tolerance and you can take more and more. I tolerated the comments, the physical abuse, and the emotional manipulation. I thought that like analogy was just so good, and really kind of could put like a really good visual of like, why is it like, I don't know, it just really, I thought you articulated it really well, of explaining kind of what happens. And
it's a codependency. It's very much a codependency. So although I was the victim in the situation, he so badly wanted and needed me as well. And even when we had that tension, right, when we were fighting, when he was hurting me, the afterwards was so great. You know, the apology stage was really good with us, but he was like an addiction for me. And you know, I so badly wanted him to change that I actually believed he would, even though I had no evidence that that was actually going to happen. This leads me to so I love Twilight. Now this is going to age me a little bit, but the first movie in Twilight, Robert Pattinson ends up talking about how he can't stop his attraction anymore to Kristen Stewart. Like it's an addiction to him. It's like his own personal brand of heroin is what he actually says. And it's very similar in abusive relationships, because Paul was my personal brand of heroin. And I so, like I said, so badly wanted the relationship to work that I actually subconsciously tricked myself to believe that it was going to.
You know, I liked how in your book you included behaviors of abusive men, which I think is really important, because I think sometimes people don't think it's an abusive behavior. You know, even in the book at one point, you had put that Paul had basically said that you looked like, you know, you had been, that it had been domestic violence, that you looked like you had been, that had happened against you. And he said, so he wasn't going to call the police. He wasn't going to, you know, call anybody. He said, because that's not what happens. And I just thought that that was so interesting, because a lot of times just not only are they kind of in denial, or I don't know if they just can't see it, don't want to see it. But also I think
yeah,
exactly. But also I think people on the outside, it can be really hard for them to say, well, is this the abuse, or no, this really isn't an abuse. And so I really liked how you included in there, you know, a list of, I mean, and it's a pretty nice list. It's like, I think what, 3 pages long. I mean, it's great, of like everything that you included. Because I think for other people out there, kind of like this is, for other people out there, I think it'll be helpful. Like, you know, he is paranoid, believes others are out to get him. He's usually moody, sullen, depressed, or any about something. He treats you roughly, physically forces you to do things you do not want to do. He has a poor image of himself, often masked by trying to act tough. You know, just all these things I think will be really helpful for, as a resource for people to read. And then there's something else that you had put in there about how you had always had, like, you know, like this just vision or dream of going to third world countries and helping people. And yet, I mean, none of this had happened yet. And yet, like, you have even, I feel like, more compassion and even more of a personal tie to it, because of what you're doing in third world countries. And, you know, just kind of remind me of myself, because I've always wanted to help women who were being abused, and not knowing that at some point that would be something I would be personally impacted by, that would just kind of, I think, cause me to have more empathy, more compassion. I'm sure it's caused you to have more empathy, more compassion, and
patience. And it's caused me to have a lot more patience, right?
Yeah. And just something that we were kind of already passionate about, that, you know, just then kind of our story allowed us to kind of use it, you know, they just kind of came together to where we were able to make, I think, a bigger difference than if it was just something we were passionate about. So I thought that was really neat.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy that, you know, God leads you down roads so you can fulfill what it is that he put you on this planet for. And, you know, even when I was involved in my abusive relationship, I used to blame God. I used to yell at God. I know God did not want me to be in that abusive relationship in the very beginning. I mean, I talk about this in my book too. You know, when we first started dating, before there was any type of violence, I literally heard God tell me, no, like, no, what are you doing? Stop. No, no. Right. But he knew I was already going to make that choice. So in response to me not listening to God, he has then made beautiful things out of broken pieces.
Mhm.
And he's known to do that. You know, God is absolutely amazing. And he loves you even if you disobey, you know? And so I disobeyed, but you know what? He gave me that heart from the very beginning. I used to have dreams about me with a bunch of African children around me, and I'm in a ball cap and we're just laughing and smiling. And I still don't have that exact picture. It's not that one. I don't have the exact picture yet. So I know that there's still a lot more work to be done because I don't have that picture yet. But it is it's close, and I'm just following what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And I'm not perfect, and nobody's perfect. And you just learn to make tragedy into triumph and teach other people to do the same damn thing.
Anything else that you'd like to share that you want people to know?
Yeah, well, if you are listening, thank you so much for listening. I I have put together a package with our team to help people overcome a lot of obstacles and trauma. And during this time, there have been many people coming up to me and asking me about this. So I want to gift everybody who's listening a PDF. It's a 6-page PDF to help people overcome obstacles. It's 5 simple steps, and those steps can be found once you text this. So text UNITE, UNITE, to 26786. Again, it's UNITE, UNITE, to 26786, and you'll get that PDF. And then you are more than welcome to reach out to me for any reason whatsoever, for help with Unsilenced Voices, for help for you, for speaking engagements. I'm doing a lot of virtual events right now, but you can reach me at Michelle, MICHELLE, at unsilencedvoices.org. So you can read that. Just put my name in front of there. So.
And I'll also include like all of this information when I like send something out. But
Great.
It's always good to talk to you. I always try to see Michelle when I'm actually in the LA area. So this is nice to actually have an interview face to face. Thank you so much for sharing with us what you've been through. Thank you for your book. This is amazing. You know, just your organization is just doing some amazing work, and just all the lives that's impacting. I mean, I just encourage everyone out there that's listening, if you're wanting to combat domestic violence, if you're wanting to combat, you know, sex trafficking, and please, 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 please get involved in her organization or other organizations that she works closely with, and, you know, do your part to end this and get rid of the Johns, as you said. I mean, we all have a part to play, and we can all make a difference, and we're just not doing enough, and we need to do more. These children, these young women, these women, even men, they need us. And I mean, like, especially for these children, they're being sold, and I mean, their life depends on us doing something. And so we need to do more. And just, Michelle, thank you so much for coming on. It was so great talking with you. And I just want to encourage everyone to just live each day with purpose. Everybody has a story. God makes beauty from ashes. And, you know, you can take what you've gone through, like Michelle has, like I have, and you can use it and just make a difference one day, one life at a time. So.
Yeah, that's super important to know, because, you know, we're not perfect. We, you know, we have faults. If we can do it, you can do it. And then one thing I do want to say, you know, Unsilenced Voices would not be where it is without our team. So I really do want to thank our team for everything that they're doing, the ones on the ground and the ones here. So really, I appreciate you guys so very much. And thank you so much for your due diligence and all of your hard work getting Unsilenced Voices to where it is now. And we've got a big dream and a big vision for where we are going next. So Whitley, thank you so much. And everybody out there, I always love to say this: just keep swimming. Always just put one foot in front of the other. We thank you.
And we look forward to seeing what else is going to be happening with Unsilenced Voices and what the future holds. So everybody, thank you again. And Michelle, thank you. And until next time.
Bye.